Part 1. Illegals without corpses, illegals outside time. This essay will use the terms illegalized, illegal, and illegal alien intentionally. Though they have their origins in nativist and racist politics, the recent adoption of undocumented by the Biden administration and its deportation and detention apparatus renders that an impossible alternative. We cannot reclaim illegal, but we can defang it. Illegalized migrants setting first foot on American land, or at the very minute their tourist visa expires, instantly experience the evaporation of their self. They are reassembled crudely into the grotesque, quivering mass of millions of unauthorized aliens, always threatening to destroy the nation from its always tender, always bleeding limes. A child who once played on the street and was called by their name, a young man fleeing the terror of a jobless and poverty-stricken future. A mother desperate to reunite with her children, the state means to traffic to another family their individual existence and experience meld into the permanent amalgam of illegality. They, illegalized migrants, experience ontological devastation through the criminalization of their very existence through law, a process both banal and sadistic. Importantly, it happens without intervention, and it happens instantly. At that moment, for the anti-illegal, time flattens and space constricts until the lines of the anti-illegal increasingly blur and the identity of the anti-illegal is cloaked in the identity of the illegal alien, slowly becoming one and the same. Soon they will begin internalizing the xenophobia aimed at them and begin learning to live with a constant fear and dread of exposure. The anxiety is so intense that they will only revert to human persons during the brief conversations with loved ones thousands of miles away to whom they will lie about their quotidian lives. When the phone call ends, they revert to illegality. Tears become a scarce resource. Depending on where the winds scatter them, the now illegal will live within the tight radius drawn by the government's compass. Moving through space becomes a constant conscious decision for the first time. Existing in space and moving through it is now a risk and a threat. Driving an automobile will feel like dying with every police vehicle threatening to transform a commute into what you feel will be an execution. There are rumors about ICE on city buses. Walking appears to be the safest, only option until an officer demands a search, and life suddenly depends on whether he will accept the lie that you simply left your identification at home. You cannot take the Greyhound to visit a cousin 120 miles away because ICE agents frequently board them and ask for documents. This claustrophobia and immobility begin to change you. The rush of leaving to a new country is replaced by the melancholy of never being allowed to see it. Timidity, meekness, cowardliness crosses the lines of what you mistakenly believe is still yourself. You will suffocate. You will dream of traveling or simply allowing your body outside the 20 miles in which you are trapped. You will live in California for 25 years. You will never see the Pacific at its western edge. This fear of your body is not restricted to the world beyond your home. You will fear that severe illness will come, and you will have to choose between trusting ancestral remedies or the hostile nurses at the hospital who ask too many questions about your place of birth. You fear the reproductive capacity of your body because you cannot care for another child, and birth control is only available to you from clandestine distributors. You fear injury or maiming, which for the illegal means the end of utility and a crisis for families who suddenly face homelessness and hunger. Fear saturates all the areas of life. You distract yourself by watching the news. They're talking about you and your parasitic existence again. You're too tired from ceaseless din of your screaming body to be offended, moved, or even bothered. At that moment, you'll understand your body is no longer yours. Who it belongs to is a controversial philosophical question, America's or the nude avatar of power. The fourth dimension offers no reprieve. Time slowly congeals, and the constitutive elements of your identity float in the past as if in an aspic. You will resist this. You will fight the progress of time itself as if you could prevent the sun from rising, illegal versus chronos. You will attempt to stay in touch with loved ones via every means, and the sight of their aging faces or their protruding pregnant bellies will fill you with feelings of envy, bitterness, and impotence you will conceal with congratulations that are sincere but hollow. You will seek images of your former home or use Google Maps to survey the state of the neighborhood and sit in your chair slack-jawed when the name of the street you grew up on has been changed. Someone will cut down the tree under which you kissed the first boy who was like you, and you will spend months mourning the fact. Chronos has the upper hand, but your will is inexhaustible. In your mind, through the power of your vivid and unimpeachable memories, everything you left will still be there. You protest against the idea of painting the house a different color. You will insist every photo be guarded as if in a museum archive, and you will find yourself perplexed by the fact you are furious when a new couch replaces the one you slept on so many times. In your mind, the place you left behind remains unchanged, and the relationships with the people whom you loved endure. But this is not the case. Faster than you can imagine, they will cease to think of you in their day-to-day. The seat at the bar they always left for you will be filled by someone new. Your landlord has forgotten your name. The bodies of all the lovers you had are wrapped around other lovers. It's a law of nature. Voids fill. If you left family behind, they will cling the tightest to you and your memory, but even they will soon feel less, remember less, care less about you. You will detect this, but deny it because in your mind, in your invented motherland, everything must remain as you left it. Then a death. You will feel time open your ribcage and pull your limbs from their joints. Kronos has transformed you into Antigone. All the years that have passed collect in the pit of your stomach. An anguished decision to stay or to leave and attempt to cross yet again. But you are not brave or noble like Antigone. You do not fulfill the rites. You stay not to follow the law, but to avoid its fury. Coward. But you say they need to understand that you have ties now, roots. Roots like those of a precariously hanging parasitic plant on the branches of a great tree, but roots nonetheless. Your children, your job, your home, and your Honda weigh more in the end than paying respects to the woman that gave you life. You will never forgive yourself for this. You will hate America even though you are becoming more like her. Cruelly, you cannot look to the future for comfort. The future is impossible. You are moored in the past. How can you dream of a future when you live every moment? Illegals have mastered a kind of mindfulness. Time, space. They conspire against the illegal. They are enemies as much as ICE agents, border patrol, police, child welfare agents, and the store clerk who doesn't accept your consular identification when all you want is to buy the cheapest whiskey so you and your boyfriend can forget the day. That moment of indignation, that frustrated desire for apple-flavored whiskey convinces you, for the first time, to admit out loud that you regret coming to America. This is a blurry sketch of the phenomenological experience of being illegalized that follows the ontological disfigurement from a former, unique self into a legal and social chimera that is indistinguishable from the others. Experiences vary on infinite variables: origin, gender, age, disability, destination, the experience of crossing itself, family size, etc. But I argue that the depersonalization of undocumented migrants is something experienced in common and simultaneously. The bodiless illegal floating in the past is every illegal. The risks of detention and deportation, though mitigated by various personal and political factors, exist for all. These, among others, are the shared experiences and attributes that suggest the possibility for an illegal alien or undocumented self-identity. In the next part of this series, I will discuss whether there can be an illegal or undocumented identity who is identified or identifies in this way, and who or what has formed the identity if it exists. Part 2. You are not undocumented. You were never unafraid. For Azul Uribe. Exiles look at non-exiles with resentment. They belong in their surroundings, you feel, whereas an exile is always out of place. What is it like to be born in a place, to stay and live there, to know that you are of it, more or less forever? Edward Said. Our bodies are tired. Our spirits are translucent. We move through the space we occupy with all the trepidation of a soul seeking to escape from purgatory. Others glance at us. We think they might be able to tell our secret. The nameless secret. We don't know what to call ourselves besides the name they have chosen, a name which feels like a strike across the face every time. When we attend an immigration clinic looking for a miracle, and when they ask us what we are, we stumble with our words and in hushed tones say, "I don't know, illegal, I guess." We see others like us waiting their turn to see a lawyer or to fill out an application. There may be a speech or a presentation about the movement or the organization putting on the clinic. We begin to learn our name. We begin to learn that we are not experiencing the consequences of our crossings alone, but that we can fight or that there are those fighting on our behalf. By contrast, those isolated by geography and other factors remain nameless. Their secret must be held tighter than they hold their children because everything depends on the Gothic cathedrals of lies they have told and tell to keep suspicion, if not away, then at bay. Sociological factors determine who learns they are undocumented, who is still illegal. Sheer luck decides who become dreamers, and individual moral fortitude decides who rejects or embraces each term. But floating above all the monarch butterflies putting on pools of blood are the nameless. They are who I weep for. In the first part of this essay, I sketched from memory my experiences of illegality on the somatic level, and recalled those of other illegalized peoples who shared them with me with the intention of setting the ground to ask an important question. Avoiding in this essay, out of necessity, the centuries-long debates about the nature and existence of a personal identity and social identity in the context of the illegal, and after decades of activism and media campaigns, I ask, is there an undocumented illegal identity? Without intent to argue against the uniqueness of personal experiences, the legal and social transformation of a person, one who had an identity established and sustained through their life, into an illegal migrant or simply an illegal, creates the scenario for shared experiences that shape self-image. It is undoubtable that illegal alien or undocumented exist as exogenous categories applied by media, politicians, and society to people who may or may not self-identify in that way. But is it a self-identity? Can the consequences of an immigration status be molded into a distinct identity and become part of a person in the way, say, nationality does? Can I feel undocumented in the same way I feel Mexican or queer or the other constituent identities that cohere into what I describe as myself? Why would I want to? Who wants me to? We immediately are confronted by the question with what it means to be illegalized. We can say roughly that the illegalized are those whom, through means of their migration status, are targeted for discrimination, invisibility, marginalization, capture, torture, deportation, and the gamut of violence that the state gives itself the permission to inflict upon them. The illegalized become illegal in various ways, entering without approval from the government, crossing the border, overstaying a visa, or violating the terms of the visa they were granted. I am not a lawyer. There may be more ways. From this starting definition, we already see divisions emerge. Those who overstay face a civil matter, while those who enter illegally are considered criminal aliens. In the case of those who re-enter after deportation, they may and frequently do face felony charges with long prison sentences. The stakes are different for the illegalized depending on how they manage to first set foot in America. These differences extend to options for legalization as well, as those who overstayed visas have pathways to regularize their status that those who cross borders may not. We are all illegalized if we are deemed to be illegal aliens, but we do not face identical legal realities. But thornier questions emerge. Who were we before our migration? Our class, racial, ethnic, gender, sexual, and linguistic background, etc., sets the stage for the experience of being illegalized, as do the conditions we lived in and the events which displaced us. Those ethnic minorities illegalized after fleeing armed conflict arguably will experience illegality in America in a different sense than those middle-class urbanites who flee after currency crashes. Our illegality seemingly flattens this, but residues of our former selves remain. It's a common complaint among illegalized Mexicans that they've been reduced or demoted from the social status they once enjoyed in their home country, especially if they have degrees or own businesses, and for them to take this out on their fellow illegalized coworkers. Horizontal discrimination and abuse happens within same ethnic communities of illegalized migrants more commonly than it should. Even as we experience the same denigrations, abuses, denial of basic services and healthcare, the potential kidnapping by immigration officers, unbearable allostatic loads, and nostalgia that can make us physically ill, our slightest differences work against our potential solidarity and coherence. As an aside in the movement, it also leads to the dynamic of those most well-positioned in their home countries becoming leaders in the organizations for migrant rights. It seems that we share somatization of our status, that we are equally frozen in the same migrants' time, that we claim to share similar political visions, but we are so fractured by other experiences that the idea of a unified illegalized people or undocumented immigrants seems like a fabrication of the media, of politicians and government attorneys whose job it is to deport us. That we have collectively undertaken a project, such as initiatives like Drop the I Word or the work of organizations like United We Dream, to rename and reclaim this agglomeration, to advocate and mobilize, is another matter. I argue decades of this advocacy have created an undocumented identity predicated on activism, organizing, and especially the act of confessing one's status as paramount. The act of confession transforms the illegalized migrants from possessing a stigmatized, passive, spoiled identity into an undocumented migrant who has the appearance of agency and even pride. But this is unstable, ill-defined, and constantly threatening to collapse under the weight of its own unanswered questions. It would be simple to resolve this by categorizing illegality as a technical term applied to a subset of migrants that is resolvable via a change of status or removal. Simply put, to see illegality as only its legal meaning and eschewing its other dimensions. But the enormous amount of labor that has been undertaken to create a acceptance and self-acceptance, develop a universal terminology, to build organizations, to create visual and literary culture, to gain political power, etc., around an undocumented identity makes it irresponsible of us to not insist on seeing if there is not something beyond being illegalized and seeing oneself as illegalized than that immigration status. Some of us are fortunate enough to learn that we are undocumented, a euphemism I detest, but do we embrace this as a core part of our identity, or is it a condition in our lives we can end at any moment if we choose to or if the law changes? I argue it is, of course, both. But the extent to which undocumented can be a personal identifier is limited by external events, personal and often national. I argue undocumented is a para-identity, a necessary answer to the question of, what am I, who am I, that is caught between the law and the abyss. It is an attempt to deflect stigma or reclaim it by constructing an identity to build mass identification in the service of a mass movement. But because it must stretch so thin to include so many, it feels inauthentic and without gravitas. Dreamer, despite its evisceration in activist circles, is another such necessary evil because it fulfills this role for young students who have been selected by their K-12 systems to obtain higher education. But do we come to understand ourselves as undocumented and see ourselves in this way? I return to this question again and again. Am I undocumented in the same way I am a homosexual, or is being undocumented like my having HIV a permanent, irrevocable part of my person or something I acquired, a malady I attend to, and which will take a miracle to cure? Beginning with two basic but essential questions to understand the extent to which undocumented is its own identity, and ones which I find difficult to answer confidently is, can one still identify as an illegalized migrant or undocumented once one's immigration status changes? Are the deported still identified, or can they identify as illegalized migrants or undocumented? I'm not so certain. The experiences of being illegalized and suffering through what can be terrifying experiences leave psychological imprints. This is undeniable. The years spent hiding an aspect of your life with tremendous consequences leave scars. The ties and new ways of seeing the world acquired by participating in advocacy or even merely witnessing it change the illegalized person and their way of being in the world. If at one moment someone identifies as illegalized or undocumented, but then regularizes their status via marriage or other means, is their identity transformed instantaneously through the magic of USCIS approval, or does it endure like a surgical scar? In other words, is it potentially transient or permanent? At the other extreme, if someone is deported after being caught driving under the influence from the room they rent in Guatemala, can they still identify as undocumented? Is the identity only contained within the legal realm, or is it also territorially bound? I am reminded of the slogan used by radical organizers, with or without their papers, we will always be illegal. They seem to suggest illegality is a permanent identity, an irreversible, unforgettable, perhaps unforgivable experience. The stigma, the denial of rights, services, and dignity, the distance from home, all this and more constitutes the illegal or the undocumented as an enduring identity from the perspective of those organizers in that moment. Shared trauma, indignation, suffering, and fear, this is the substrate of the undocumented identity upon which so much else has been built and that nonprofits and others use as raw material. If this is the case, and I believe it is, then undocumented or illegalized migrant can be a potent and enduring identity that can even remain with a person after they have crossed geographic or legal borders. However, the degree of identification, the specific way in which it is interpreted as either a legal status or as a group identification, and whether it is public or intimate varies strongly from person to person based on their unique life circumstances. This suggests to me that it is also an ill-defined, misused, and, as I mentioned before, externally developed identity in flux that struggles to fully encapsulate what it means to live as an illegalized migrant in the United States. To identify as undocumented is an attempt to give these experiences meaning, but in truth, it is simply reiterating what one is called by the law and the nativists in the language of foundation boardrooms. Undocumented is thus an identity which refers to our legal status, but which more importantly describes our relationship to hegemonic American culture and our place within it. For others with whom I've spoken with, the time in their life where they were undocumented is simply a short moment that once resolved no longer carried meaning. As I mentioned, the route we take to become illegalized and the persons we were before in our homes affects our experiences in America, and it seems to shape the extent to which we claim undocumented as an identity or reach for its synonyms to describe our experiences in a unified way. This would suggest that the adoption of undocumented as an identity is uneven, more likely among those with access to activist organizations, college campuses, and friendly media outlets than those in rural communities or otherwise isolated. Undocumented is thus an identity which refers to our legal status, but which more importantly describes our relationship to hegemonic American culture and our place within it. I arrive at the idea that undocumented has become an identity through sheer force of university and 501c3 money, but that it is redundant and burdened by questions of authenticity and universality. Most importantly, it is stuck on its sandbar because there is no consensus as to whether it describes a legal status and/or a specific ontology with a distinct phenomenology, and that there are too few scholars with an interest in answering this question. Is there a definitive history of the term? Is there documented dialogue or debate about the adoption of the term as a self-identifier? Who chose this for us, and why this word specifically? I am pessimistic regarding whether we can resolve these questions. From Mexico, after having self-deported 4 years ago, I still feel like an illegalized migrant. It is a part of my identity, and my time in the movement is part of my life story. In that sense, I cannot say that what I experienced was merely a failure to obtain status, but rather an experience over time and through space that marked me forever. What happened to us is not a clerical error. However, I am not undocumented. What happened to me and so many others is not a lack of documents. On the contrary, the United States produces immense amounts of documentation about us throughout our lives. What happened to us is not a clerical error. While undocumented is semi-solid and widely adopted, it's odious and infuriating for its literal meaning. You are not undocumented. You are a displaced person being denied rights and marginalized for having the audacity to survive the world we have inherited. Perhaps no one word can encapsulate that. Perhaps attempting to identify through this experience is building a fort on quicksand, but our shared experiences cannot be denied. As a citizen now in my own country, I can say, with or without their papers, I will always be illegal. All this having been said, in the pit of my stomach, I suspect undocumented will not endure much longer as an identity, but will reveal itself as a Faustian pact. Already the federal government uses the term as it deports undocumented non-citizens to countries where they are killed. Congratulations, directors, media personalities, deans, and elected officials on your excellent advocacy to ensure we forget the I word and instead learn to be missing pages in unfiled forms.